We had to have this moment where some deer run across the road, which will be computer-generated deer, and it makes Will Smith swerve, and he goes into sort of a 360-520 spin.
Probably about 20% of the driving you see in the movie I'm doing. Then there's other rigs and stuff.
The secret of doing good action in any genre is making sure that you see the lead artist is in that shoot, because people, when they go to the movies, they're going to come and see Will Smith in this movie. So what the Go-Mobile does gave us the opportunity of putting Will Smith in the driving seat of the Shelby Mustang.
All right, here we go, stand by.
But because the way the Go-Mobile is configured, we had an expert stunt driver driving the Go-Mobile from another position.
Drive down, I'll give you an action cue, you pull away, and you'll say 3, 2, 1, deer, and then swerve right after deer.
It's quite a clever configuration. It's had another steering wheel and driving unit, which is totally separate from the one that Will Smith is sitting in, which is the proper car.
In my mind, I just put me over here thinking I'm there.
Not that Will Smith probably couldn't have done the driving, you know, he's a good enough driver, but at the same time, with the lights on the car, you know, the visibility is actually down to 0 for the actor, and at the same time he has to act. So it gave us the opportunity to put Will in the situation realistically, rather than just having a blue screen and placing the fast-moving background behind him like they used to in the old days.
Woo! Oh, yeah, we got that one.
Well, this is Abby. She's German Shepherd, working in the picture I Am Legend.
There's a dog in half the movie, and that was a big worry because, you know, you always worry, okay, well, we can work with the actors, we can, you know, lock all these locations, but then we have a dog that might not do what we want it to do.
Stay.
Having worked on a lot of animal pictures, I know how difficult it is to do things, and the repetition and how bored animals get with it, or how they have a mind of their own. They might not want to do something they've rehearsed for weeks and weeks. That's just nature.
Hey, Abby, come on over here. Come here.
Steve Barrett has trained the 2 dogs we've got fantastically well. I've been watching them, and I'm lucky I'm sitting on the sidelines watching poor Steve go through the grinder.
Leave it, stay, watch, stay, back up, back.
I have to say the dog, you know, has been fantastic.
Stay, action will. Stay.
It's very rare we actually have a problem with the dog or we don't get the dog to do what we want. There's actually 3 dogs. We have Abby and Kona and Sammy, and Abby's sort of the hero dog. We use her most of the time.
We definitely go through the script. We break down all of the scenes. We try to get a feel of what's important for those particular scenes, and then we use different techniques to pull that emotion out of her during that scene. I might teach her to close her mouth, lower her head, as if she's starting to stalk something.
And action on the dog! Abby, come on, let's go!
It's the same way that you prepare an athlete who's going to have, you know, 5 races in a particular day. You can't prepare him for 20 minutes a day and then all of a sudden have those 5 races. They're not ready. So you prepare them for those days they're going to go through in your prep, the amount of time that you're putting into it. If you use a ball, that in essence is prey to them. It could be a rabbit, or it could be a ball. And so we might use a ball as a reward for that kind of a feel as she's moving for that. The whole idea is that it is work, but it's fun. Dogs that I train, the second you get up and head to the door, they're right with you. They want to go, and it's an adventure. It's like going out for the hunt. You want to create that camaraderie and that feeling of togetherness, and then you pass that on to the actor. We try to portray this animal that really, there is nothing left for her except this one person. And one of the most important things with a film like this, when you're working with an actor the level of Will that's been nominated a couple times, you really need to stay out of his way. Get your work done and get their relationship across, but really allow him to have the freedom to act. The actual fight is going to be CG work, but then we cut in and we see Abby by the car, and at that point, that is special effects makeup. First of all, everything we're putting on her is safe for the dog, so if she does lick any of it, it's not going to hurt her. And then secondly, we'll start with small pieces hanging off of her fur and little objects and things, and get her to work and do her scenes, ignoring those things.
But for me, it's a lot easier because a lot of the savage attacks will be with a CG type of dog. But I hate the sequence because it reminds me of Old Yeller, and it's so sad. It makes me feel like crying. I've never forgotten Old Yeller when I saw it as a little kid, you know.
The approach that Francis has taken is that it's not dark and dismal. It's actually gone back to nature. So there's grass growing on 42nd Street. There's birds and deer running through the streets of Manhattan. So there's the wish fulfillment in that aspect.
We're looking for the busiest areas and the areas that'll give the largest scale for that approach. We're talking about 42nd Street and Grand Central. We're talking about the Flatiron area, 23rd and Broadway. We're talking about 14th Street, where the High Line is. We're talking about 5th Avenue. So the elements in New York that make the most dramatic statement, because we're trying to show it not just empty, but the effect of 3 years of neglect.
We did some research, and I knew that I wanted to take a really naturalistic approach to this movie. And you know, there's a very easy way of making Manhattan empty, which is that you shoot everything on a stage and you just add it all later. And I didn't want to do that at all because it feels like a very different kind of movie, and it doesn't really feel natural. Beyond that, we have this idea that the city's not just empty, but it's been years, and that nature's actually reclaiming the city. So added on this empty city is nature. There's a lot of extra things that we're having to add to, you know, each and every environment that we empty out.
First, you have to dress the street. We have to lay the street in with abandoned cars. We have to apply 3 years worth of muck to those cars. We have to dress storefronts and building facades. We have to bring in artificial greens to make it look like grass and weeds are busting up through cracks in the sidewalk. And a lot of this stuff has to be done on the overnight because the city streets during the day are very busy, and the mayor's office gives us certain windows of opportunity within which we can actually control traffic. We never did anything in a small way on this movie. Every time we hit the street, it was big because it was an empty, post-apocalyptic environment. So it was quite a challenge every place we went.
With Neville, what we sort of decided was that this guy has kind of structured himself a routine. And he's very disciplined about that routine. You know, he sort of sets alarms and he does certain things, and he's very orderly and he keeps his house in order. And it's what sort of keeps him as sane as possible in a situation like this. And so part of that is the way he eats, you know, the discipline about working out and his body, you know, his haircut, the way he keeps his hair close. All those things are, you know, extreme choices for somebody who leads a very disciplined life. And it's almost as if that, you know, if that routine were to start to break down, the guy would actually fall apart.
In the beginning, when the plague was beginning to decimate everybody, he had a wife and a child. And it was that responsibility that kept him going. So it's conceivable that once they had died, he was so in the habit of surviving on a day-to-day basis that he just did it without thinking, although he did consider suicide many times.
Francis was probably the first person to bring it up, the idea that everything is actually plentiful. You know, he has access to all things, and he wouldn't have to take anything because it's going to be there when he goes back. So the idea of setting up, you know, there's a medical supply, so he knows that this is where medicine is, this is where canned goods are, and this, you know, this is where gasoline storage, and that he actually uses the entire city as his home. It gives a real sense of authenticity and realism to it. So he's essentially systematically sweeping the city, and he's basically taking inventory. As an actor, I feel like I'm, you know, my grandmother used to say, growing like a weed. So I feel, you know, I feel like I'm growing like a weed as an actor right now. It's just a beautiful exercise to not be able to talk, to have to figure out how to communicate things without talking, to have to search for behavior. You know, for me, it is, you know, the center of what acting is. So it's actually given me a wonderful opportunity, almost like Buddhism, where you just be quiet for a while, and if you just shut up, you'll start to discover a whole lot of things.
What's interesting about Will, and what I think he's doing an amazing job of in this movie, is You know, a lot of people would just take to this role and brood. And it might be interesting, but it would be very shallow. And what's fantastic about Will is that he has such a warmth to him and such a charisma to him that even when he does that, it has so many layers. You know, there's real sympathy for him.
This is the second movie that Will and I have worked on together. We worked on iRobot, and we're going off this into Tonight He Comes. And the reason we find each other again and again is we have very similar orientation, and that is a kind of thoroughness of imagination. We like to really explore the minutia of everything, from scene to motivation, to dialogue, to background. And Francis turns out to love the same thing, so it's been really a wonderful match. And so it's been hours and hours of myself, Will's partner James Lasseter, Francis, and Will, all just imagining ourselves into this world. Well, what would you look for? Where would it be? How would you document it? Where would you put it? What would you take? What would you leave? Where would you go? And we tried to turn it over and over and over again, vetting it and sort of throwing it against the shoals of our own skepticism until some things endured. And hopefully those are the things that will endure in the movie as well.
Coming through. The scene that we're working on tonight is the scene where Will's family is being evacuated from the city prior to the city being quarantined. This is kind of the last chance for Will to get his family off the island.
We had to have the speed of this convoy going from Washington Square to the pier. We shot the background plates for that, which in fact is the most cameras I've ever used on one vehicle. We had 13 cameras. It's just not practical to shoot that sort of thing at night. You think, well, how the heck do we get all these plates? We can't do it 6 or 7 times. We just don't have the time of keep moving the cameras around and doing the same run. So we came up with this idea, which I'd used once before on War of the Worlds, and we had just a panorama. But on War of the Worlds we only had 8 cameras. This time we went for broke and had 13 cameras. So it was a huge, great machine that we drove down through Mulberry Street, and we were missing cars by inches, and then we put those behind the scene you see with the family in the car.
Keep the colonel and his family between us and don't let anyone stop you.
Hey guys, little test fire. Fire in the hole!
The military branches that provide us the vehicles and the additional hardware that we get can provide everything except the weapons. This is Hollywood. We don't use real guns on set, so all of the weapons are not provided by the military. They're brought to us by a company called Weapons Specialists here in New York. It would be improper and overly dangerous to have real weapons on set. Yep. Prior to the film starting shooting, we brought in the producers, the directors, the ADs to go through the various types of weapon systems that we thought would be appropriate for this film. Originally, we had thought about going with a larger gun to really convey the sense that he's looking to put them down for good. We found a nice balance with the M4 weapon system as both agile and light enough to be on him at all times and yet have enough downrange stopping power to serve his needs as Robert Neville. Once we had settled on that, we built up some guns with special accessories and kind of a distinctive silhouette. We customized it a little bit with a special optic system. Obviously, we had to integrate a lighting system for it since a lot of the film takes place in the dark and that's where the bad guys live.
Set, ready, and action.
Obviously, Will has extensive firearms experience from the various films that he's been working on in the past, and his weapon handling skills are remarkable. He's a pleasure to work with. For this film, we actually had to kind of change his style of weapons handling because his character has been alone for over 3 years, so we had to kind of relax some of the safety protocols that apply in normal society because he is the only man alive as far as he's aware. Once he interfaces with Elise and Ethan during the later part of the film, we change his style back to one where he has to be more in control and more concerned about what he may be covering with his gun and where his rounds are going.